Hello, everybody, and welcome to the very first episode of the podcast. I have with me a very special guest. That's why I'm speaking in English. Dr. Daniel Feldman from the Department of the English Literature and Linguistic Studies at Bar-Ilan University. How are you, sir?
I'm well. It's good to be with you, Guy. Thank you for
Oh,
having me.
that's great. So, can you talk a little bit about your area of your field of research?
I'd be happy to. I study Holocaust literature and more generally, traumatic events of the past as they are represented in literature. I'm specifically interested in the imaginative or the fictional, the literary and cultural representation of the difficult past and historic narrative, how these two different historical and literary or cultural modes interact as we understand the most difficult parts of our human experience.
Yeah, I remember the first time I stepped foot in your class, and I think the first thing that came out of my mouth that I said to you was, "Are you the teacher?" If I'm not mistaken.
That was a compliment. That was many years ago, Guy. I don't think you'd
I
be asking
thought,
that
yeah,
question
I
anymore.
thought maybe you were a technician or something like that, because you were tinkering around with the microphones and the computers, yeah, or something like
Well,
that.
I took that as a compliment, but I've
You
always,
you
I think
you
that
look like an IT guy.
good. That's my perhaps my
Frankly.
higher
So
aspiration. I think that class was Art, Atrocity, Truth, wasn't it? That was the name of
yes,
the class.
yes, it was. I think if I'm if I if I'm trying to compliment you, and I'm not trying to compliment you too much, but but I will give you this. I think that your course, Art, Atrocity, and Truth, I think it is your intellectual or academic magnum opus. I think it took a long while to construct, to build all the different themes, all the different history, the mediums of art. Um, I was drawn, I was mesmerized by your class, and I don't know uh, how I learned anything in your class because I was awe-stricken to be to be honest.
Well,
Yeah.
you're gracious to say so. Could you elaborate? What was it specifically? Was it the topic? Was it the
Specifically, it was the very first time I saw someone um, um, exacting the interdisciplinary pedagogical method in a in a healthy in an interesting way. I think um, you had a lot of visuals. You had great emphasis on the written word as well as visual representations. I was drawn to all the different materials, to all the different stories and peoples and from all these different nations, and it
hmm,
was quite a ride, I have to say. So
yeah.
just to talk about some of the things that really impacted me, I think I had heard of a Mouse by Art Spiegelman, um, but I only focused on the visual aspect of the graphic novel. And the
Right.
story I had heard a few times. You hear a lot of recollections of Holocaust survivors. There was a nice anecdote that, if you know Stephen Fry, have you
Sure.
heard?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
he came on Late Night with Craig Ferguson, and he told the story about speaking to a Jewish Holocaust survivor, a woman that they talked about being in Auschwitz in the camps, and one day she was summoned to. She was a classically trained, I think, a pianist, if I'm not mistaken, um, and she was summoned by the camp doctor, Dr. Mengele, um,
Yeah.
and he asked her, And she said she performed the classical piece the Tormerai by Robert Schumann. And Stephen Fry asked her if he thanked her after she performed the piece. And then she said,
Wow.
my dear boy, you're mistaken, or you got it all wrong. Do you think your washing machine or your ironing board or something like that, we were not human to them? And that struck a deep chord with me. And I thought about that story for about 5 years, maybe. Yeah, it
Mm-hmm.
was. So I think I don't want to tell you how to do your job, but I think you can have a more have an even more interdisciplinary approach
Sure.
to
Yeah. Well,
expand your horizons.
yeah,
Yeah.
what I hear in that anecdote, and if I do teach the course again, I haven't taught it in several years, and I can share with you in a second why, if you're of interest. But is that art cannot only be art at times is not only a means of wrestling with the past, of reconstructing, and the thesis of that course, and you were very perspicacious, you were perceptive to note that a lot of effort went into it, since it was based on my doctoral dissertation of many years ago, and it was a course I was privileged to introduce first as a graduate student, doctoral student, now I guess 15 years ago and a lifetime ago when I was in New Haven at Yale. And the course has, as it argues, that art in fact can construct a form of veracity, of truth. I'm putting these three different ideas: art,
I
how
love
it
I
represents
love
atrocity. Mm-hmm.
I love the this way to the gases. It
Oh yeah,
was
the
it
Borowski,
was a
Tadek
great
Borowski.
it was a great, in my opinion, a
Well,
black
Tadeusz, yeah,
a black
that is
comedy.
it is one of the dark masterpieces of atrocity
Yes,
literature, of Holocaust literature, written by a non-Jew, a
it
Pole,
reminded
Tadek Borowski.
it
Mm-hmm.
reminded me of a modernist novel. Do you know George Bataille by any chance?
Mm-hmm. George Bataille, yeah,
Yeah.
yes,
Have you read The Story of the Eye?
no. What
No.
happens? What's that? Which one is that?
I think he wrote it in 1934, if I'm not mistaken. It's a kind of half dystopian, half Dionysian experience of eternal youth. It is, it is, it is a deep look into human sexuality, if I can say that. But it also deals with his personal trauma. And I think it ought to be looked at because you brought some very pretty distressing and gross material, gross in a good sense. It was artful, it was meaningful, it was instructive. um, Disgrace was a shock
Oh
to
yes,
this
yeah.
system. It was
The Ozik's,
it was a shock to this system.
the shawl,
Yeah,
and you're
it
mentioning
was like the first time I've read Hamlet or the Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka or the Penal Settlement by Franz Kafka also. So it was a shock to the system, and I think it was the part of maybe truth more in the free part, in the free sections of the course. It will
yeah,
fall under the category of truth, maybe. And
yeah,
the
those are good
atrocity
suggestions. Mm-hmm.
about the Civil War in, I don't remember the famous Civil War in Africa. I can't remember the
In
country.
Rwanda, yeah,
In Rwanda, yes, of course. In, you brought some visual aids, if we can say, to describe the horrors and the aftermath and the trials of the war
yeah.
criminals. Yes,
And that's not done gratuitously. It's, a very different aesthetic about the body. It was a recent event. We were studying this, I guess, in the mid 2000 teens, when it was within 20 years of that 1994 genocide. And although what I think might be of interest to some of your listeners, Rwandans, at least the planners of some of the genocide memorials and museums, came to Israel even to learn from Jews, from Israelis, as if we have long experience, as if we are experts in this. Nonetheless, went in their own direction, and you can see this. I don't want to overburden you, or didn't do this years ago when we were teaching that class, and in subsequent versions of it. But you can see this also in Cambodia, in Guatemala, that they're just different modes or different traditions that relate to how people think of the body, what dignity means in each of these places, um, and so each of them will follow its own course, even as there is a continuity, a comparative element, a sort of general historic resemblance about what people do to each other in our worst moments. But the
Yes.
commemoration is often part of what we do that is best,
Yes,
sort of trying to honor.
you spliced it up real nice. Every section, or the syllabus, let's say, you spliced it up real nice. You had for every category something dealing with art, something dealing with atrocity, and something dealing with truth, and it was real. And I don't know. Maybe I'm a toddler because I can learn through visuals, because the written word was not embedded in me in such a
Mhm.
powerful way until I got to university, until I was exposed to the world of learning, actually. And the visuals were so instructive. So I like the. We also brought another Jewish artist. What was his name?
I don't remember exactly referring to, but I do remember that you wrote about that. I can recall that your paper dealt with some of the ethical and emotional resonances of Holocaust art, and you were trying to draw a comparison as well. You're trying to follow that comparative methodology
Yeah,
between that and the work of
yeah.
other events.
We talked about and learned about and watched the Show Off film by Claude Lanzmann. Am I not? Am I?
That's
Am I
correct. That's right.
correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because I remember sitting through the whole thing in one go.
Wow,
So
that's you
yeah,
have a lot of stamina, guy. You
yeah,
have a,
yeah.
a lot of patience.
Because every memorial, every year of the Memorial Day, I sit and I soak in the horror that I will never let myself watch throughout the year. You know, I just compact
Do you want
all,
to? I wonder why that
compress all
is.
the, yeah.
Can you account for that? I do this. I mean, I sometimes
Okay.
felt I have felt at different times of my life, of my academic career, somewhat diffident or defensive about what I do. Oh, another Holocaust scholar,
Mm,
and isn't there
mhm,
enough
mhm,
said about
yeah.
that? And the truth is that I've come to terms with this is what I do, and someone in my generation, in our
Mm,
generation, I can say more broadly, is the one to do this. And actually, there aren't in our generation that many people who do this. There are many more people who study business.
mm.
This is my lot, and it is important. It's a major event, as well as the legacy, how it relates to other events, and I've come to terms with that. But it's not. I don't. I don't think of it as a depressive or a gratuitous. It's not an obsession,
No,
and
no, I'm just saying
yeah. So just
I am letting myself, I'm letting in all the horrors. Um,
I think
there.
that's actually the fact that it can horrify, that we can think of it as that is part of the challenge. I think
No, I'm
at times of the
compressing.
yeah, I know
I'm trying to compress all that
into one
experience
day.
into one day, the Memorial
I
Day.
try to retain, and I find myself at this stage of my life very much drawn to we may have read one or two works of her. People like Edith Finch, people who wrote as well, either during the war or immediately afterwards, whose artistry, either in literary written form or in
Cynthia
visual form,
Ozick's the shawl, of course.
that is able to capture some of the astonishment, to remain shocked that this event happened and in some places continues to happen, and that it doesn't become sort of inevitable, that we don't allow our historical understanding to become ritualized or routinized, where we start thinking, of course this was going to happen, but to remain shocked, that is a major challenge of our historical perspective.
Before your course, I knew about different works of art, of beautiful classical music and plays by Shakespeare and the whole lot, dealing with tragedy and but not but not anything as a concrete and as clear and as well thought as some of the material you brought that deal with trauma, that deal with atrocity, with art. And maybe I have a very elitist approach to art, but because I want a work of art to be able to stand on its own feet.
Sure. There are moments, there are traumatic. What you're saying is very interesting. It reminds me of something that one of my mentors, one of my teachers, someone named Professor Jeffrey Harmon, a well-known person in the world of Holocaust studies, Jewish studies, as well as literary studies more generally, that he wrote, and I remember him teaching, was that there are moments of trauma, of pathology in art more generally. You can look in Oedipus Rex, the Sophocles version, and as very disturbing moments that even occur just off stage. Whereas in King Lear, there was a similar moment of blinding, of gouging out the eyes, and Shakespeare updates it to have that trauma occur, that sort of individual personal atrocity occur on stage, which was a shocking innovation. But these works of art, of course, they're very works of world masterpieces, are not related to specific historical reference.
Yes,
they have that ennobling.
They are not rooted in real atrocity.
Correct. Yes. Exactly. And so it has a different effect. It works upon us differently. We feel as if that most base, most vulgar, barbaric elements of human behavior have been, as Plato said, have been cathected, there's a catharsis on stage. They're released in a ritual form through the drama.
I have to say one thing I learned from your course, and this is such a great phonetic word, the parsimony. That's the thing I loved the most, I think, out of the entirety of your course. But I was a lot more stupid and a lot younger. And I think the parsimony was, I know, it's like the Merriam-Webster's word of the day was like, maybe you picked it up from online.
Maybe, I don't know. I like
parsimony.
I like that a lot. Yeah. You're very kind. But one of the things that we have to keep in mind, you're saying, you're reflecting, and there's nothing to be ashamed of for having learned. The situation, the condition of learning is ignorance. We don't come to learn based on something we know. You couldn't take that course now and it would have no effect on you because you've spent years dealing with it.
I went through the ringer, as we say.
Yeah, that's part of the pleasure. It's also painful. Learning is it hurts, but it's also part of the satisfaction of learning. And I can't teach that course in the same way anymore because I have gone through it myself intellectually and with several rounds of students, but we don't know what we're going to learn next. We are ignorant of what we'll be dealing with next.
You constructed your course in such a way that will be accessible to the current generation, to have a lot of different distractions that are little nuggets of gold. Yeah.
I hope so. I wonder about that. Now, you're a bit older than the current university
Yes.
students, especially the undergraduates in university now. You
Now
graduated some
I'm
years
a
ago.
lot older, but that's
Yeah,
fine. Yeah.
that gap will continue to grow. And I find myself wondering about that since current students are so tied not just to visual but to video, to action. There's a whole movement to colorize black and white photos from the 20th century, including from the
Mm.
Holocaust and World War II era and beforehand, in order to make it seem part of the same world as young people today. There was a very influential campaign regarding a fictional woman in Budapest from a few years ago that was launched in Israel that did that. The question that I also have is about just the relationship. People, you may have known grandparents or even great grandparents. You may have known people. That is increasingly rare. When I was younger, I thought this was of no great consequence. This was not that important, but I was wrong. It is actually very important. The Holocaust is really not part of people's living memory, but it's a story that they're told about someone else at a different world. And the other complication is, our country is increasingly diverse, at least in the classroom. We're a place that has many Palestinian Israelis, Arab Israelis in the classroom, and for them, some of this art about at least Jewish atrocity, about the Holocaust, is difficult for them to take. It's not. They don't know much about it, but they see it as somehow. Not all of them. I'm saying I shouldn't generalize, but I have seen how for some students it can be almost an assault because it overwrites, it erases, it occludes what is their national trauma, which is far more complex. You were saying how before the story with Stephen Fry and the survivor, how art itself can be complicit in the atrocity. Mm-hmm. That's not my, or perhaps not even your view about Israeli Holocaust commemoration, but it might be the view of some citizens of this country, of some Arab citizens of this country, and that needs to be dealt with. So the last time I taught it, I tried to have a day where we were talking just about my story, my pain, my family's history of displacement, and yours. I think it was an important step in the right direction, but the class itself, I found in its most recent teaching, which was about 4 years ago, was just working on much rougher terrain, much more complicated terrain. And this is one of the reasons. The media is one, the personal connection, the age of the students, and the era that we've come to in our time, in our decade now, as well as the very different experience of some of the students.
Well, I want to thank you so much. And before we ended, I wanted to give you a book recommendation. This is Dave Eggers,
Sure.
The Parade. Have you heard of it?
Not that book, but I've heard of it. I admire the author.
I think you should try this book because it's Orwellian, dystopian, Kafka-esque.
I will definitely check it out. Something that colleagues and family members will ask at the end of a class, like, how was that course? Was it successful? And my answer always, following Freud, is one never knows, since teaching is one of those impossible professions. You'll only know years later. And having this conversation, at least with you, if it only even affected one student, you're not speaking for anyone else in the course. It is a testament to, at least
in this case, it having been a success. I'm also a teacher now. Yeah.
So you can take that into your own view. You'll know if years later you can have a conversation like this with one of your students. You'll know it has been at least in that case a job well done. Okay, so thank you guys. It's been very gratifying to speak with you.
For speaking with you and for your eye-opening, shock to the system, monkey wrench to the wheels course, and your approach is just. I always viewed you, the moment I saw you, I know you were Atticus Finch for me. You were the righteous, the studious, learned.
You're the dutiful scout.
Oh,
all right.
Thank you
guys,
so much.
A pleasure. I wish you a lot of luck with this endeavor, and let's catch up again. We'll see how things play out.
Of course, definitely.
Okay,
thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks for having me.